Fellow Freedom fans, David Alan Carmichael, Preservative Talk Radio, engaging the issues of the day on a constitutional basis, a biblical basis, and the basis of right versus wrong. Today especially, we're going to do a review where I'm going to quote somebody in depth. It's Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch. This past week, he had to give a ruling to kick a case out of the Supreme Court. And in his opinion, it was about time. But the very fact that he was having to do it was an indicator that there was some serious problems in our nation, in our government, in our Supreme Court, and what's been going on lately as a result, as a symptom of the pandemic of dementia that came along with COVID. Actually, I forecast the pandemic of dementia right here on Nooga-Radio, and its affiliated friends who are affiliated with Nooga-Radio. 10 years ago, actually more than 10 years ago, I talked about the pandemic of dementia, and it fully manifested itself in 2020, and people went crazy. So we're going to actually leapfrog off of Justice Gorsuch comments because they're quite profound. And so we're going to tell you a little bit about this case that came up. It was Haisha versus Haisha versus Mayorkas. I guess he's the what is the Department of Homeland Defense kind of thing, right? Homeland Security guy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually read from Gorsuch the comments that he made. And then what I'm going to do, of course, I'm going to stop along the way because I've had some exciting things happen in my life. As I tell you about this case, you're going to hear some things that it's going to be relevant to the case that we have going on in the U.S. Court of Appeals in the D.C. Circuit, and in relationship to what happened in this case, in the Haisha case. You're going to see some. It's an interesting thing. I found that a decision by the district court, yes, Judge Emmett Sullivan, who got such a bad rap with holding Mr. Flynn accountable about lying about his lying, Judge Sullivan did a great job explaining the law with regard to these, what's been called Title 42, this order that said you got to keep everybody out of the country because we're afraid of everybody, and during the pandemic of dementia COVID. So we're going to look at how Judge Sullivan's case, as he went through the law, and I'm reading it to get prepared for this radio broadcast. All of a sudden I see things pop, and he's explaining what the law is, and it has to do with us and suing the United States and the D.C. District Court. Different judge than Judge Sullivan said that our case is moot. It's a long story. I don't want to go into detail right now. But I was so excited to see Judge Sullivan, who is a very senior judge in the D.C. District Court, and very savvy guy, by the way. If you read his opinions, he got kind of a bad rap with the drama that had to do with Admiral Flynn, or General Flynn. So let's get right. All that stuff being put aside, maybe I'll have an opportunity to address those things specifically later in a way that's entertaining and enlightening and edifying. We'll do that another time. So let me go right to Justice Gorsuch's comment here. And he did this on May 18th, 2023. So just this past week. This case concerns Title 42 orders. Those emergency decrees severely restricted immigration to this country for the ostensible purpose of preventing the spread of COVID-19. And he's going to tell us the story here. What's this all about? The federal government began issuing the orders in March 2020 and continued issuing them until April 2022 when officials decided they were no longer necessary. If that seems reasonable enough, events soon took a turn. In a federal district court in Louisiana, a number of states argued that the government's decision to end Title 42 orders violated the Administrative Procedures Act. And I'll tell you what this is about. So this Title 42 is a health and welfare code. And in Title 42, there's this provision to keep people at the border if in their country there's some disease and we're worried about the disease from that country. We have a rule, a law, a statute that keeps them out of the country. And so that's what this was based on. Of course, this disease is everywhere. It's a pandemic, right? It's pandemic. But nonetheless, that people, and then these orders went on to say, and they had to come up with memoranda that would explain what do you got to do with these people if they come across the border. And so they had this program in certain situations that they would send people right back to their country. There'd be no court cases, no nothing, because we're in fear of our lives. They're going to bring a disease, and we don't want the disease coming in through the courtroom, so we're just going to kick them back in their country. And then, of course, it got more convoluted than that. And then people started making asylum requests, because asylum, it now puts you in equipoise with the danger of health. Well, my health is in danger. If I stay in this country, they're going to kill me. So I really need to come into the United States under the asylum. So their interest in our duty as a government that we institute to protect our life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now they've got bonus points because their life is at stake where they're coming from. And now COVID danger is relatively small. Give me a test. Make sure I don't have COVID, but look at my asylum claim. So right now there's been a lot of asylum claims in the federal courts. I've been watching the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals discussions on it, some of the D.C. Circuit discussions of it over the last several weeks. So I've been, kind of keeping track of how the courts are dealing with this subject. But so here we have Gorsuch making a comment about what's going on. And so Louisiana sues saying, hey, wait a minute. Don't stop this. Let me tell you what happened. So this family who is in needing asylum goes to the D.C. District Court. Judge Emmett Sullivan looks at the situation, looks at the facts, looks at the law, and looks at the Constitution, and the whole thing is just completely a mess. And he says it. Judge Sullivan explains it. This is all messed up. Yes, I'm going to. Now, what he did was a little bit extreme, is he acknowledged that the rules were completely arbitrary, because once they started implementing the law, they started by little policy adjustments and like non-Congress legislation through the executive agency. That's important, and Gorsuch cared about that. Through non-legislative stuff, little in-the-closet edicts, it was becoming more and more arbitrary, where some people are being injured and other people are let off the hook under the same statute. So it wasn't being applied appropriately. And Judge Emmett Sullivan in the D.C. District figured it out. He spelled it out beautifully. I really enjoyed reading it. And then so he issued an injunction, but it wasn't just for this family, this group that needed asylum because of the dangers that they faced in their home country. He issued this order that had a nationwide implication. So that's kind of a dangerous innovation. So in response to that, Louisiana says, whoa, wait a minute. We've got a border crisis, and these people are flooding across the border, and this little pandemic of dementia innovation is helping us keep the flood tide back over this illegal immigration thing going on. So they file a case to intervene and say, wait a minute, you can't make a nationwide sweeping order from the D.C. district. So they start complaining. And Judge Gorsuch was not happy about that, was not happy about Judge Sullivan making a nationwide edict, injunction, emergency injunction, I guess is what it is. And then he wasn't happy about Louisiana using a immigration problem to say, well, we got to keep this pandemic of dementia law going here because it's going to help us with our immigration problem. They're two different, it's apples and oranges here. Okay. So the system was being abused. Again, it was part of the pandemic of dementia. Okay. People have lost their minds and they've checked out. They're doing what they think is they call it for themselves a compelling issue. They believe it's compelling. All right. But they're not thinking about the big picture. There's supposed to be a structure of government, limits. You're starting to exercise all kinds of crazy powers. You're putting people in jail. You're being mean to people. You're kicking them out of school. You're forcing them to wear masks in school. You're forcing them to not go to church. There's all kinds of nutty things going on here. What happened to the law? Okay. So Judge Gorsuch is eventually going to explain his feelings about this, his thoughts, which are actually so sound. So he goes on to say, okay, so there's these lawsuits. If that seems reasonable enough, events soon took a turn. In a federal district court, those people sued. And, they said it was under the Administrative Procedures Act. They said, you can't turn this thing off because you haven't followed the notice requirements. Okay. But the states apparently calculated that even a short court-ordered extension of these decrees was worth the fight, considering the border issue. Worth it because, in their judgment, new and different crises had emerged at the border, and the federal government had done too little to address it. Keeping Title 42 orders in place, even temporarily, was better than the alternative. In the end, the district court agreed with the state's administrative procedures arguments and entered a nationwide injunction that effectively required the government to enforce Title 42 orders unless it complied with the statute's notice and comment procedures. Okay, so we've got two competing injunctions. Turn the Title 42 off and turn it back on. So then he goes on and explains 1,000 miles away in D.C., we've got asylum seekers. So it is that the federal government found itself in an inevitable spot, bound by two inconsistent nationwide commands, one requiring it to enforce Title 42 orders and another practically forbidding it from doing so. So this is what Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch is addressing here. If these head-spinning developments were not enough, more followed. Displeased with the D.C. District Court's ruling, some of the states moved to intervene. I told you about that. And ultimately, the Court of Appeals denied the state's motion to intervene as untimely because this is being appealed now. So late in 2022, the states turned to this court, that's the Supreme Court, seeking two things. First, they asked for expedited review of the appellate court's order denying their motion to intervene. Secondly, and by the way, in our case right now, we've got two people trying to intervene in our case for good reason. So it's interesting to me as I'm reading all this stuff. It's pushing buttons in my brains because all of these court cases that I'm reading and bring to talk radio actually going to help us in our quest to get the government to behave themselves in our case that's currently in federal court. Second, they asked for a stay of the D.C. District Court's decree vacating the Title 42 orders. Now, this is what he says. He said the Supreme Court granted both requests. So they wanted expedited review of the appellate court's ordering. Okay, so the Supreme Court's going to expedite review, look at Louisiana's ability to intervene in the district court case or whatever. And then they asked for a stay of the D.C. District Court's orders that shut down the Title 42. In doing so, the court effectively extended it indefinitely. The Title 42 kick everybody back because of COVID. They extended it indefinitely. That's the Supreme Court. Now, almost 5 months later, the court puts a final twist on the tale. It vacates the appellate court's order denying the state's motion to intervene, so it throws that out, and remands with instructions to dismiss the motion as moot. So watch this. So they were denied the ability to intervene, and the Supreme Court says, oh, let him in. Come on, it's all right. Let him in. But when they come in, dismiss the motion as moot. So we're going to come back to this. A little bit confusing, but Justice Gorsuch does a beautiful job of kind of bringing it all together and seeing us what it is that we need to take home with us. Okay? So this is Preservative Talk Radio, David Alan Carmichael, Nooga-Radio Network. We'll be right back. All right, so video audience, this is my chance to take a break. What I'd like you to do on this Preservative Talk Radio, especially whether it be YouTube or Rumble, Rumble user, Preservative Talk Radio, all lowercase, one word. I'd like you to share it, to like it, and to, because my goal is I need to be able to be streaming this live, and we have to have a certain amount of people who actually, let me look at what's on my screen here. I got to see what my deadline is here. We need people to like and subscribe or follow, I guess is the word follow, because we need a certain minimum before we can stream live. I'd like to be streaming live on Rumble. It seems that more people get to this video via Rumble. So I'm kind of excited about that. And I've got about 45 seconds. We're going to get back to what we were doing here. And so I'm going to have to be quiet because our audio is going to kick in with all the music. Fellow Freedom fans, David Alan Carmichael back with Preservative Talk Radio on the Nooga-Radio Network. Just keep in mind as you're going along in the area that you can tune to 96.9 FM when you're right smack in Chattanooga as you're getting to Ooltewah, 99.7. Northwest Georgia, you can tune in 107.5 FM. You can catch me on video on Rumble. This is going to be posted on Rumble if it's not streaming live now. It's going to be at Preservative Talk Radio. So you can go to Preservative Talk Radio as a user on Rumble and also look it up on YouTube, and you can catch that later and share it with your friends. So coming back into this, I'm reading from Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch comments just from last week on this case, where he tells the background is there was acting on a law that was supposed to keep like certain diseases out of certain countries way back in the day. They basically implemented it for the pandemic of dementia COVID, and then made sure nobody could travel anywhere. It's just shut down the world. So that happened. And so what's been happening, there's a lot of asylum requests because asylum, you might be able to get it in the country without being sent back. But if you're not under an asylum process, you're getting sent back to your country under the guise of it's a COVID thing. It's an emergency. There's no due process. We're not going to look at your case. We don't want you sneezing in the courtroom because you're going to contaminate everything. So again, the states were duking it out. There was conflicting orders. You got to keep this Title 42 thing keeping people out of the country. You got to keep it going. Another court says you got to get rid of it. It gets up to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court, in our last exciting episode moments ago, we explained the Supreme Court granted immediate emergency accelerated review, whatever it's called, and they allowed themselves to review it, but then they ordered the court they allowed Louisiana to intervene, but told the appeals court, oh, by the way, let them intervene and then moot their case. Let them intervene and then kick them out of court. And then what it does is it dismisses the case. It's just one way of getting rid of things, but it's a little bit confusing, a little bit weird. So that's what Justice Gorsuch was talking about just before we took an opportunity to hear some encouraging words from advertising. And then so here's what he does. He says, I recite all this tortured procedural history, and I did too. Not because I think the court's decision today is wrong. Nearly 5 months ago, I argued that the court erred when it granted expedited review and issued a stay. As I explained at the time, I do not discount the state's concern about what is happening at the border. But now this is important, guys. We've got to pay attention. This is me now. We've got to pay attention to what's happening, what's going on in the machinations of what is supposed to be your government. You see, it's not your government over you. It's you as a governing your affairs through your delegates, through your servants. So your servants have been running amok. Something's happening. The will of the people, those who are in charge, has not been communicated to the slaves who you pay with your taxes. It hasn't gone to them somehow. Somehow they've lost focus, and we need some overseers from us, me and you, are overseers to. Now remember, in America, slavery is not supposed, it's illegal to be involuntary servitude, but it can be voluntary. And there's people who have volunteered to come serve you and me, all of us, in all our multifaceted, multicolored, and multi-ethnic selves. We are the masters, and they have voluntarily become our bond servants. And our bond servants are all confused. They're scattering about like a bunch of crazy ants and stuff, and they're not fulfilling their duty that we've instituted and designed through this, what we call government, to have our servants governing so that it helps us, each other, one another, love our neighbor as ourselves. So here's Judge Gorsuch sharing his opinion, which I agree with completely. So he doesn't discount the state's concern about the border crisis. However, it's a border crisis, not, and now I'm quoting him, not a COVID crisis. And the court took a serious misstep, that's the Supreme Court, when it effectively allowed non-parties to this case to manipulate our docket to prolong an emergency decree designed for one crisis in order to address an entirely different one. In my observation, this is the Carmichael observation, if you have money and power through money, I've observed these interveners manipulating court dockets just because there's a case and they're going to jump in and they're going to mess it up for everybody. I mean, it's just my observation. In our case in the federal court right now, we've got interveners, and I moved that they would join, not just intervene, that they become joint plaintiffs because they got the same problem we've had. So don't just intervene because you're interested in the outcome. Be a partner. So they moved to intervene, we moved to join them. And so that's what we're dealing with in the Court of Appeals right now. So here's Judge Gorsuch. I lay out the history of this case only because it is so typical, not just as an illustration of the quandaries that can follow when district courts award nationwide relief, a problem I have written about before. Yes, sir, that's really, I agree with him, right? Keep it local, keep it limited. Think of our friend Toulis, right? He's got some profound statements about keeping it local. There's power in that local. And if there's a conflict where all the locals start conflicting with one another, then take the more macro view, macro view and deal with it there. But don't take your local problem and turn it into a nationwide crisis. So he said, not just as an illustration of the quandaries that can follow when district courts award nationwide relief, problem he's written about before. Even more importantly, the history of this case illustrates the disruption we have experienced over the last 3 years in how our laws are made and our freedoms observed. Here's the question. How are laws made, freedoms observed? As many have complained on Nooga-Radio Network, decrees by the governor, whimsical decrees that have no foundation in law, are evil. And when they invite you to participate, that's seditious speech. That's my opinion and shared by many I know. Since March, Judge Gorsuch says, since March 2020, we have experienced the greatest intrusions on civil liberties in the peacetime history of this country. Now, keeping it local, nonetheless, we can watch our TV and we find it's global. So this is kind of like biblical proportions here. So it's the greatest intrusions on civil liberties in the peacetime history of this country. Executive officials across the country issued emergency decrees on a breathtaking scale. Governors and local leaders imposed lockdown orders, forcing people to remain in their homes. You know what that is? That's false imprisonment, isn't it? Now, if I wasn't busy right now suing the United States and the Department of State and their minions, you know what I might be wanting to do? Filing suit about whoever it is who has done a false imprisonment. Right? Isn't that what it was? Okay. But I was busy. Okay, we filed suit in 2019, so I was busy. So you got to do this stuff yourself. You know, I can't do everything. They shuttered businesses and schools, public and private. They closed churches, even as they allowed casinos and other favored businesses to carry on. They could shed innocent blood all they wanted. You just couldn't encourage people to not shed innocent blood. Couldn't invite them to your discussion of not shedding innocent blood. You could only invite them to your discussion about shedding innocent blood. That was me. Okay, back to Gorsuch. They threatened violators not just with civil penalties, but with criminal sanctions too. And I'm going to pause there too. I don't know if you noticed, but the people that stood won. I'm thinking the first guy that they had in the news in the nationwide pandemic of dementia was a guy on they call it the Eastern Shore of Virginia. It was a little pastor, and they arrested him, took him to jail on a Sunday morning because he had 16 people in his building. Normally now watch this, normally it's 250. But they had said, well, you cannot have any more than 10 people. Well, so he scattered his flock, right? He scattered his flock, said, hey, tune in, we're going to do a video stream, but we're ministering to homeless people every week. And they have nowhere to go. They don't have their little video stream. So 16 people showed up and he let them in. And out of the 250, they arrested the pastor. Now, I went to a church. I drove, 3 hours to get to a church that was meeting and there was 15, 20 people because everybody scattered. But the pastor was going to keep the doors open. So I went to his church. I had to be where somebody had not lost their mind. Okay? So people like this pastor, guess what? He won his case. There's people throughout the country, by the way, who stood and don't feel bad, change your behavior. If you back down, well, I need to not lose my job. Well, guess what happened? Those people who lost their job eventually got their money back. And you know what? They set a precedent. And this is the land of the free and the home of the brave, right? It's not going to be the land of the free unless it is the home of the brave. And so this is not to chastise you. It's to say, this is going to happen again. This was just the first wave, folks. This is going to happen again. They checked it out. They tested you. They tested us to see what we would tolerate. Maybe someday I'll tell you what happened when somebody questioned my not having a mask in public. And I shared my feelings with them. It was awkward for everybody in the place. But let's get back to Gorsuch's comments here. They threatened violators not just with civil penalties, but with criminal sanctions too. They surveilled church parking lots, recorded license plates, and issued notices warning that attendance at even outdoor services satisfying all state social distancing and hygiene requirements could amount to criminal conduct. They lost their minds, friends. Pandemic of dementia, COVID. They divided cities and neighborhoods into color-coded zones, forced individuals to fight for their freedoms in court on emergency timetables, and then changed their color-coded schemes when defeat in court seemed imminent. So they're testing you in this, my friends. They're trying to see if you're willing to capitulate. Now, if you won't capitulate, they back off. That's what's happened in our case. We suing the United States, and it took us 3 years just to get them to actually in February, they put something on their website that now takes care of people instead of shafting them like they did with us. It would not have happened had we not sued them. Now, we did it without a lawyer who's got $160,000 to sue the government just to get your passport. That's ridiculous. Okay? So what they do in our case is they say, okay, we won't hurt Mr. Carmichael anymore or his friends. Or, oh, by the way, now they're starting to make it look like they're not going to hurt anybody else because, you know why? We're about to win our case. And so they say, oh, the case is moot. We're not going to be mean to him anymore. And so we're saying, no, this is going to be, we need a judgment. We need at least $1, if not $500,000 for our false imprisonment. And you're not getting away with this. You're not getting out of this until this is on the record. We need to expose your misbehavior. You're not going to get out of it. But what they've done, the court partners in our case with the Department of State and the court, not Judge Emmett Sullivan. I feel it might have been a little bit different in his court. Okay. Same district, different judge. So what they do is they just, okay, we're going to lose. They called our bluff. Let's back down. Okay. Well, this is America, the land of the free and the home of the brave. Let's not tolerate it. It's our responsibility if our slaves, right, our bondservants that have voluntarily become slaves of ours, that we feed them, if there's an uprising, it's responsibility on us, the masters, to put them in control. Those are harsh statements. That's a reality. You're a free person. You're a free man. You're a free woman. Act like it. Take control. Be the executive. Fulfill your responsibility. That's how you're going to love your neighbor as yourself. That's how you're going to love your bondservants. Stay tuned. Preservative Talk Radio. We'll be right back. Okay, I'm having fun with this. It's I didn't mean to talk like this about the bondservant thing. It just kind of hit me. So now we're going to have another 15 minutes of talking about Judge Gorsuch. Now, I don't know what this thing looked like with a little screen showing up. I don't think I'm going to stick the screen up there this time. So this is I'm testing. You're my guinea pig. So I'm going to see what it looks like on video when I'm done. And someday I'll have 2 or 3 screens. I've had 2 screens right now. I could manipulate this. And they're sitting over there. I could show you the screens, but you'd see my pencils and stuff. I could turn this. But we're going to stay like that. So let me look at my audio to see what we're doing. See how much time we have. So again, subscribe. If you've got questions, make comments where you can. And it's possible that I can bring it back. Another thing I want to do is I'm going to set up like an internet phone that will come to this phone, right? So I can, take calls, but not one where you can call my home because you know what my phone number is, right? Uh-oh, that's messed up. Okay. All right. So we're going to start. I got to go back to my little video thing in about 15 seconds. We're going to hear some music. Fellow freedom fans, David Alan Carmichael, Preservative Talk Radio. I say that every time. That's what I do. Thank you for continuing to tune in to the Nooga-Radio Network, 96.9 FM, 99.7, 107.5 FM. Thank you for tuning in. Again, check out my Rumble, Preservative Talk Radio, one word, lowercase. And that's it. So tell your friends about that, and let's tune into this thing, because again, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to address everything on a constitutional basis, biblical basis, and the basis of right versus wrong. I probably shouldn't even have to tell you that, because I think you can figure that out by listening to the content. It's more substantive than you're going to get on your typical factional radio, divide and conquer, mayhem in the public format. Here on Nooga-Radio, we really prefer to have substance and something that's going to build you up, build the community, tear down the walls that separate it, the false separations between between ethnicities and colors and communities. Let's break down the fake walls that are being built up and being promulgated by troublemakers in our media. All right? You know, when we open the door for one another at the local mini mart, we love one another. What's up with that? Okay? So let's just remember that we got it figured out, but it's time for us, the masters, to take care of, let's see, this hurts to say this, but I think it's going to evoke serious emotional thoughts here. But this is serious. We have to, as the masters, start taking rule over our uppity slaves. Isn't that brutal and horrible that I said that? These uppity slaves. Now remember, that's voluntary. They volunteered to get the benefits of their paycheck and their position and power, but they forget why they were supposed to volunteer. Like military people volunteer to uphold the Constitution, protect us from outside forces. These people in our government that have volunteered to be our servants, our bond servants, they're getting a little bit uppity. They forget what their mission is. But as the master and the master-servant relationship and the laws thereto is we have to take responsibility and put them in their place because our neighbors are being injured. Their fellow bondservants are being injured by a few thugs that are making the neighborhood or bringing down the neighborhood. Okay? So keep that in mind. So Judge Gorsuch making comments about the pandemic of dementia COVID here. He said federal officials entered the act too, not just with emergency immigration decrees. They deployed a public health emergency to regulate landlord-tenant relations nationwide. So what are they doing regulating? And this is our fault. If we don't stand up and stand against it and put them under our feet, it's our fault. And it hurts our neighbors. I know so many people being injured by this kind of abuse of the power of somebody owning land or not owning land and the government sticking their nose and interfering with contracts. Okay, it's just bad. They used a workplace safety agency to issue a vaccination mandate for most working Americans. They threatened to fire non-compliant employees and warned that service members who refused to vaccinate might face dishonorable discharge and confinement. Along the way, it seems federal officials may have pressured social media companies to suppress information about pandemic policies with which they disagreed. Now, stepping back, I had several people come to me asking advice because they weren't going to take the vax, they weren't going to take the jab, some call it, and they were about to get fired. And some of them had religious convictions. They put in the religious conviction request and everything like that, and they were denied. Too bad, so sad. Okay, we think you're sincere about your conviction. No, okay, but because you won't take the jab, you're not allowed on the shipyard. I'll use that as an example. Not allowed on the shipyard, and because you can't get on the shipyard, you won't be able to check into work, and because you're going to be not checking into work, you're going to get fired because you're not checking into work. So it's not really the vaccine or your religious accommodation issue. It's the fact that you're not punching in. It was absolutely ridiculous. They're being vindicated. But I watched so many courageous people, a man and woman who both worked in the same place. They were going to lose all their livelihood. They had children. What courage. What amazing courage. All I could do is tell them they were right and to pray for them for God's blessing and protection. Because they were this is the beast, man. I mean, this is a beastly machinery here, and we've got to put it back under our control. While executive officials issued new emergency decrees at a furious pace, state legislatures and Congress, the bodies normally responsible for adopting our laws, too often fell silent. Courts bound to protect our liberties addressed a few but hardly all of the intrusions upon them. In some cases like this one, courts even allowed themselves to be used to perpetuate emergency public health decrees for collateral purposes, itself a form of emergency lawmaking by litigation. Thank you, Judge Gorsuch. He's paying attention, and he's calling this stuff out in a beautiful way. And again, it comes back down to authority. It's something we emphasize all the time. By what authority are you acting? Oh, it doesn't matter. I have a compelling interest. I think it's such an emergency. It doesn't matter what authority. I'm acting without authority, but I've got power, so I can put you in jail. But it doesn't matter what the authority structure is, folks. That is the minister for our good, right? Romans 13, submit to the authorities, the exousia, the authority in our country is the constitutional structure, the separation of powers, ambition competing against ambition, as James Madison quipped in the Federalist Papers. It's critically important. It is the minister of ours for our good. God's minister for our good. When we let these people go outside the authority structure, they're the wicked ones that Romans 13 says need to be admonished. But we're not going to get praised as doing good unless we can hold these folks accountable. There's your biblical perspective. Gorsuch said, doubtless many lessons can be learned from this chapter in our history, and hopefully serious efforts will be made to study it. One lesson might be this: fear and the desire for safety are powerful forces. They can lead to, I'm thinking of somebody else's quip back in John Adams said something quite a while ago. They can lead to a clamor for action, almost any action, as long as someone does something to address a perceived threat. A leader, now this is the Hitler Nazi danger here. A leader or an expert who claims he can fix everything if only we would do exactly as he says can prove an irresistible force. We do not need to confront a bayonet. We need only a nudge before we will willingly abandon the nicety of requiring laws to be adopted by our legislative representatives and accept rule by decree. That's what we do. Oh, a little nudge with a bayonet, a little threat. Then we capitulate. Along the way, we will accede to the loss of many cherished civil liberties, the right to worship freely, to debate public policy without censorship, to gather with friends and family, or simply to leave our homes. We may even cheer on those who ask us to disregard our normal lawmaking processes and forfeit our personal freedoms. Of course, this is no new story. Even the ancients warned that the democracies can degenerate toward autocracy in the face of fear. But maybe we have learned another lesson too. The concentration of power in the hands of so few may be efficient and sometimes popular, but it does not tend towards sound government. Otherwise, one person or his advisors however one person or his advisor may be, however wise one person or his advisors may be, that is no substitute for the wisdom of the whole of the American people that can be tapped in the legislative process. This is a mixed government. It makes me think about making comments there. I think I'm going to have to do a show on mixed government. That's what we're going to do. Decisions produced by those who indulge no criticism are rarely as good as those produced after robust and uncensored debate. Decisions announced on the fly are rarely as wise as those that come after careful deliberation. Decisions made by a few often yield unintended consequences that may be avoided when more are consulted. The other interest. That was the interesting thing about if you read the Federalist Papers. You see, 80 plus chapters or publications in the New York newspapers that were addressing everybody's concerns. We thought about this, then we thought about that. It goes back and forth because there's competing interests and they're coming to a compromise in a legitimate way. What is best of both ways of thinking? And let's apply it. Synergy, folks. Decisions announced on the fly are rarely as wise as those that come after careful deliberation. Decisions made by a few often yield unintended consequences that may be avoided when more are consulted. Autocracies have always suffered these defects. Maybe, hopefully, we have learned these lessons too. I think I appreciate his Pollyanna view here. that he actually hopes that we've learned these lessons. In the 1970s, Congress studied the use of emergency decrees and observed that they can allow executive authorities to tap into extraordinary powers. Congress also observed that emergency decrees have a habit of long outliving the crisis that generate them. Some federal emergencies, proclamations, Congress noted had remained in effect for years or decades after the emergency in question had passed. At the same time, Congress recognized that quick unilateral executive action is sometimes necessary and permitted in our constitutional order. Yeah, you can turn off writ of habeas corpus in certain emergencies, right? In military protection, the life, the actual existence of the nation is threatened immediately. Congress is the one who's supposed to do that, not pass it off to some czar. So back with Gorsuch. In an effort to balance these considerations and ensure a more normal operation of our laws and a firmer protection of our liberties, Congress adopted a number of new guardrails in the National Emergencies Act. I'm going to have to read that. Despite that law, the number of declared emergencies has only grown in the ensuing years. It is hard not to wonder whether, after nearly a half century and in light of our nation's recent experience, another look is warranted. We're going to do it here on Nooga-Radio. We're going to look at the Emergencies Act, whatever it's called, the National Emergencies Act. We're going to look at it. We're going to scrutinize it. And we, together with you, are going to write letters. And we're going to publish them here. We're going to in fact, I might even do it on video. I'm thinking about typing these letters, streaming live while I'm typing. Okay, we'll see how that works. It is hard not to wonder, too, whether state legislatures might profitably re-examine the proper scope of emergency executive powers at the state level. At the very least, one can hope that the judiciary will not soon again allow itself to be part of the problem by permitting litigants to manipulate our docket to perpetuate a decree designed for one emergency to address another. Make no mistake, decisive executive action is sometimes necessary and appropriate, but if emergency decrees promise to solve some problems, they threaten to generate others. And rule by indefinite emergency edict risks leaving all of us with a shell of a democracy and civil liberties just as hollow. Thank you, Judge Gorsuch. That is reality, folks. That is just seriously important. So we're still, let's just say we're coming out of a crisis. We've lived the crisis. The crisis has been the pandemic of dementia. It's not been COVID. Well, part of the crisis, COVID, yeah, the people died because of protocols that were insane. But can we stave off the next crisis when the pandemic, another pandemic of dementia wave hits us? Have we got what it takes? What are you and I going to do together to communicate our will to our bond servants who are basking in the bliss of their paycheck derived from us, but have a responsibility to exercise their power to burn calories for the protection of our neighbor, one another? Yes, and that includes us individually. David Alan Carmichael, Preservative Talk Radio. Check me out at Rumble at Preservative Talk Radio. And stay tuned to this Nooga-Radio Network because we have every desire to be meeting your need, one another's needs, in just fulfilling our duty to love God and love our neighbor as ourselves. So that is our radio show, and that is our radio show. That's what it is. So here we are, and I want you to give us a share, check it out on Rumble. I think on YouTube, I think this is streaming at David Alan Carmichael 7971. I'm not sure. It might be streaming at youtube.com/freelancehuman. It might be David Alan Carmichael 7971. I can't really remember. I set it up. Doesn't matter. So you're seeing my incompetence. Well, that's it. If you've got any questions or comments, please put it where we can see it. And again, give it to your friends. Like, share, follow. Especially go to Rumble, Preservative Talk Radio. and just type that in the search. It'll take you to what we're doing here. And like, follow, whatever it is you're going to do. Make comments there. It's a great place to make comments. And then the goal is we're going to trigger things. I think our message needs to reach more people. And you are going to partner with me. We're going to be grassroots making it happen. Have a good day.